Have you ever felt that something is wrong in your life, but you can't quite explain what it is? As if, no matter how hard you try to improve, something pulls you back into the same mistakes, the same destructive patterns, the same cycles of frustration. Perhaps it's that inner voice that sabotages you at the most important moments, convincing you to give up. Just when you are about to achieve something significant, or that irrational anger that arises out of nowhere and explodes in situations that, looking back, weren't even that serious. It could be the envy you deny feeling, but that silently eats away at you when you see someone achieving something that deep down you also desire. Or that paralyzing fear of failure that makes you hide behind excuses and procrastination. What you don't realize is that all of this is not an accident. There is a force operating in the shadows of your mind, shaping your personality, your reactions, and even your choices. A force that you have spent your whole life ignoring, but that has never stopped acting. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the hidden part of your psyche, where you buried everything you didn't want to see in yourself. Your repressed desires, your weaknesses, your shames, your darkest emotions, everything you once hid to be accepted by the world. But here lies the problem. What you ignore controls you. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you pretend it doesn't exist. On the contrary, the more you reject it, the more it grows in the underground of your mind, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It surfaces when you explode for no apparent reason. When you push away the people you love, and then wonder why you are always alone. When you judge others with hatred, not realizing that you are merely projecting onto them what you fear most in yourself. When you sabotage yourself, fail on purpose, and in the end convince yourself that you were never good enough to really try, Jung said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If you do not face your shadow, it will continue to pull the strings behind the scenes, while you believe that everything is a matter of chance. But if you have the courage to look within, if you are willing to confront what you have always avoided, you can transform the shadow into your greatest source of power. And that is exactly what you will discover in this video. Get ready, because this journey will not be comfortable. But if you truly wish to break the cycle of self-sabotage and take control of your life, this is the only path. Let's begin. Since the moment you were born, you were taught about what is acceptable and what is not. From a young age, you learned that some emotions should be shown, while others needed to be hidden. You may not even remember, but you heard phrases like, "Stop crying," "Don't be weak," "Don't be angry," "Be a good person," "Don't be so selfish," "Share." And so, little by little, entire parts of you were repressed. What happened to your anger, your sadness, your desire to assert yourself? What happened to those impulses that didn't fit the image of the right person that the world wanted you to be? They didn't disappear. They were pushed to the depths of your unconscious, forming what Carl Jung called the shadow, the hidden part of your personality, where all the feelings, desires, and impulses you rejected to be accepted by society are stored. The shadow is not an abstract or distant concept. It is within you now, operating behind the scenes of your mind. Every time you feel uncomfortable in front of someone who is overly confident, it may be because deep down you have repressed your own desire to express yourself. When you harshly criticize someone seeking recognition, it may be because there is a desire within you to be seen, but it has been buried under layers of self-denial. When you feel envy of someone's success, It may be because you have repressed your own ambition, because one day someone told you that wanting too much was arrogance. And so, without realizing it, you walk through life like an iceberg. The part that others see is just the visible tip, but the largest part of who you really are remains hidden below the surface, invisible even to you. But ignoring the shadow does not mean it stops acting. On the contrary, the more you deny it, the more it manifests destructively in your irrational fears, in your tendency to repeat the same mistakes, in the resentment you cannot explain, in the toxic patterns that repeat like an endless cycle. The real question is not whether you have a shadow. The question is how much it is in control of your life without you realizing it. But how exactly does this hidden part of your mind manipulate you and trap you in patterns that seem impossible to escape? In the next part, we will dive into the subtle and destructive ways your shadow acts without you noticing. And when you see this, you will no longer be able to ignore it. Have you ever wondered why certain patterns repeat in your life? Why, even when trying to change, it seems like you always end up back at square one? Why do you feel anger, envy, or fear without a clear reason? All of this happens because your shadow is not asleep. It is in control. And the worst part, it acts without you realizing it. The shadow does not attack directly. It does not shout. It does not announce itself. Instead, it operates subtly, silently, manipulating your emotions, your choices, and your reactions. It acts like a ghost within you, distorting your perception of reality. You think you are in command of your decisions, but in reality, you are being guided by hidden impulses that were buried years ago. One of the most common ways the shadow manifests is through projection. Have you ever felt an inexplicable hatred for someone? Have you ever criticized someone with extreme intensity without a real reason? This happens because we often see in others what we do not want to admit in ourselves. For example, a person who is taught to suppress their own ambition may feel irrational contempt for those who seek success. Someone who fears their own aggressiveness may hate direct and assertive people. Instead of recognizing these traits in themselves, they project them onto others and attack. Another destructive mechanism of the shadow is self-sabotage. This occurs when, unconsciously, you create obstacles to your own growth. You procrastinate at crucial moments, give up too soon, make wrong choices repeatedly, all because there is a part of you that believes you do not deserve success or fears the consequences of change. This explains why many people fail just when they are about to achieve something significant. The shadow acts as an invisible guardian, preventing you from leaving your comfort zone, even if that comfort zone is your own unhappiness. And it doesn't stop there. The shadow also manifests in your relationships. Have you noticed how some people always seem to attract the same types of toxic partners? How some people always end up in destructive friendships? This happens because, without realizing it, we project our traumas and unconsciously seek situations that reinforce our deepest fears. If you have a shadow filled with rejection, you may be drawn to people who reinforce that rejection. If you carry within you a shadow full of insecurity, you may connect with people who make sure to always leave you doubting your own worth. And the worst part, the shadow can take over your identity without you realizing it. You convince yourself that this is just how it is, that your way of acting and feeling is natural, when in fact, it has been shaped by a build-up of repressed experiences. You start to believe that you're just unlucky, that you have always been anxious, that you have never been good enough, when in reality, you're just living under the influence of this hidden part of yourself. But if the shadow has so much power over you, the obvious question is, how can we recognize the signs that we are being dominated by it? How can we know if it is not ourselves in control, but rather this dark side of our psyche? In the next segment, we will dive into the clear and undeniable signs that your shadow is manipulating your life without you realizing it. And when you see these signs, it will be impossible to continue pretending that it does not exist. If your life feels stuck in a cycle of repetitions, if you constantly feel frustrated, anxious, or unable to change certain behaviors, then it is possible that your shadow is in control without you realizing it. But how can you know for sure? How can you identify the signs that this hidden part of your psyche is manipulating your choices and silently ruining your life? The first clear evidence of the shadow's dominance is constant projection. Have you ever noticed that some people seem to irritate you more than usual? That certain traits in others provoke a disproportionate emotional reaction in you? This happens because the shadow makes you see in others what you do not accept in yourself. Someone who has repressed their own need for attention may feel an irrational disdain for people who express themselves freely. A person who rejects their own aggressiveness may be excessively bothered by those who are more direct and assertive. The problem is that as long as you do not recognize that this irritation comes from within, you will continue blaming the external world for your own internal conflicts. Another sign that the shadow is in control is constant self-sabotage. Have you ever been on the verge of achieving a goal and suddenly everything started to go wrong, as if somehow you were digging your own defeat? This happens because the shadow fears change. If at some point in your life you were taught to believe that you do not deserve success, love, or happiness, this repressed belief will continue to operate in the back of your mind, finding subtle ways to ensure that you never surpass those limits. That is why so many people give up just when they are about to achieve something significant. The third symptom of an uncontrolled shadow is the repetitive attraction to toxic relationships. If you always get involved with the same type of person, someone who devalues you, ignores you, uses you, this is not a coincidence. There is something within you that seeks this dynamic, even without realizing it. If you were rejected in childhood, you may spend your entire life unconsciously seeking people who reinforce that rejection. If you grew up being taught to repress your own anger, you may be drawn to people who abuse your patience simply because your shadow has found an indirect way to express that repressed energy moreover. A powerful sign that the shadow is dominating your life is the irrational fear of judgment. Are you terrified of being criticized? Do you avoid exposing yourself as much as possible, fearing you might look ridiculous? If so, your shadow is likely filled with repressed shame. Perhaps at some point you learned that making mistakes was unacceptable, that being authentic meant risking rejection. The result? A lifetime lived defensively, always trying to please, always trying to avoid any chance of being seen as wrong. But this fear does not come from the present. It is a shadow of the past, a remnant of everything that has been denied and buried within you. Finally, one of the cruelest signs of the shadow is the inexplicable emptiness. Have you ever felt that something is missing in your life, even when, in theory, everything seems fine, as if there is a part of you that is never satisfied, that always feels something essential is absent. This happens because throughout your life, you needed to amputate parts of yourself to be accepted by the world. You repressed your true desires, your deepest ambitions, your authenticity, and now, even without knowing it, you feel the weight of that absence. But if these signs resonate with you, it does not mean that all is lost. On the contrary, recognizing the shadow is the first step to regaining control of your life. The real danger is not having a shadow, because we all do. The danger lies in continuing to live without awareness of it. But now comes the big question. What happens if you continue to ignore your shadow? What happens when it becomes so repressed that it explodes in unpredictable and destructive ways? In the next segment, we will explore the cost of living in denial and why ignoring your shadow may be the biggest mistake of your life. The shadow you ignore does not disappear. It accumulates, strengthens, and waits. The more you deny it, the more it finds ways to manifest itself. And if you do not take control, these manifestations can become catastrophic. You can spend years pretending that certain emotions and impulses do not exist. But there will come a time when everything that has been repressed will come to the surface. And when that happens, you will have no choice but to face the consequences. One of the greatest dangers of ignoring your shadow is that it always finds a way to escape. If you repress your anger, it may erupt as an uncontrolled explosion at an inopportune moment, destroying relationships and opportunities. If you hide your deepest desires, they may emerge in self-destructive ways, in addiction, compulsion, excess. If you bury your traumas, they may manifest as anxiety crises, panic attacks, or even physical symptoms that medicine cannot explain. And don't be fooled. The shadow is not limited to your inner life. It shapes your reality. If you do not acknowledge your fear of abandonment, you may end up desperately clinging to toxic relationships just to avoid the pain of loneliness. If you deny your own ambition, you may sabotage yourself professionally, convincing yourself that success is not for you. If you hide your desires, you may get lost in silent frustrations, not understanding why your life feels so unsatisfactory. But the greatest danger of all, if you do not integrate your shadow, it may end up taking total control of your life. Have you ever met someone who seems to be consumed by their own resentment? Who always sees others as guilty? Who carries a silent anger? Who lives on the defensive, always ready to attack? These people were not born this way. They have simply spent their entire lives repressing their pain, until one day their shadows became so strong that they took control. The result? An endless cycle of resentment, fear, and self-sabotage. And perhaps the worst of all is depersonalization, the phenomenon of feeling like a stranger within your own body, as if you are disconnected from who you really are. This happens because by repressing your shadow, you also repress fundamental parts of yourself. You try to be only the good side, eliminating any trace of darkness, without realizing that you are cutting out essential pieces of your psyche over time. This leads to a constant feeling of emptiness, as if something is missing, but you cannot identify what. But then the inevitable question arises: how to escape this cycle, how to stop being a victim of your own shadow and start integrating it consciously. In the next segment, you will discover the keys to transforming your shadow from a hidden enemy into a powerful ally, and thus finally take control of your own life. Now that you understand the danger of ignoring your shadow, the most important question arises. How do you bring it to light? How do you stop being manipulated by these hidden aspects of your psyche and start using them to your advantage? Integrating the shadow does not mean destroying or eliminating it, because that is impossible. What Jung teaches us is that the shadow is not our enemy. On the contrary, it contains essential parts of who we are, dormant forces that can become our greatest power if we know how to access them. The problem has never been the shadow itself, but rather our denial of it. The first step to integrating it is to consciously recognize it. This means paying attention to your emotional triggers. When something or someone provokes an exaggerated reaction in you, stop and ask, what does this say about me? Instead of blaming the other, turn your gaze inward. If someone irritates you because they are arrogant, is that person merely expressing a confidence that you have repressed? If you feel contempt for those who seek success, is there not a part of you that also wants that, but has been suffocated by limiting beliefs? The second step is to allow yourself to feel what has been denied. If you have spent your whole life pretending you don't feel anger, it's time to look at that feeling without fear. This doesn't mean going around exploding at people. It means sitting with yourself and admitting, yes, I feel anger. Yes, I feel envy. Yes, I'm afraid, and that's okay. The shadow only dominates you when you try to pretend it doesn't exist. When you face it head on, it loses the control it had over you. A powerful tool for this process is reflective writing. Take a notebook and start jotting down your deepest thoughts, uncensored. Ask yourself, what aspects of myself do I reject? What behaviors of others do I judge harshly? What do I fear the most that others might discover about me? Writing about these issues can be uncomfortable, but it is also liberating, because by naming your shadow, you bring it into the light of consciousness, and what is conscious can be controlled. Another essential method is visualization and internal dialogue. Jung suggested that we should talk to our shadow as if it were a separate entity. It may sound strange, but it works. Close your eyes and imagine this repressed part of you. What does it look like? What does it want to tell you? Often when we give voice to our shadow, we discover that it is not a monster, but rather a forgotten part of ourselves that just wants to be heard. But integrating the shadow is not an immediate process. It is a continuous journey that requires courage and honesty. The most important thing is to understand that your darkness does not have to be your enemy. Repressed anger can transform into strength. Fear can turn into wisdom. Desire can become creativity. Everything that has been denied can be repurposed as fuel for your growth. Now that you know how to start integrating your shadow, the final question arises. Why is this so rare? Why do so few people have the courage to look within? In the last segment, we will explore why most people choose denial and illusion, and how you can become an exception, someone who truly awakens to who they really are. At this point, you already know that the shadow is within you, whether you like it or not. You can continue denying its existence, pretending that your fears, insecurities, and repressed impulses do not affect your life. Or you can make the decision that few people have the courage to make, to look within and regain control of your own psyche. But before moving forward, there is something you need to understand. Most people will never do this work. Most will continue repeating the same mistakes, living the same cycles of self-sabotage, and blaming the world for their problems. They will remain stuck in the past, feeding resentments, projecting their frustrations onto others, convincing themselves that fate or society is responsible for their failure. They will never have the courage to face the truth about themselves. But you do, if you've made it this far. If you have followed every part of this journey, it means that something inside you knows that change is necessary, that you are tired of being a prisoner of unconscious patterns, tired of feeling dominated by forces you do not understand. It means you are ready to take a step that few dare to take, to integrate your shadow and become who you truly are. But don't be fooled. This path is not easy. Seeing your shadow means giving up the comfortable illusion that you already know everything about yourself. It means confronting past pains, facing unpleasant truths, admitting that much of what happens in your life is your own responsibility. This process can be uncomfortable, but it is also the only real way to liberation. The question now is, what are you going to do with this? Will you simply absorb this information and go on with your life as if nothing happened? Or will you actually put it into practice? If something in this video resonated with you, tell me in the comments. What part of your shadow do you realize you have been ignoring? Have you noticed repetitive patterns in your life that can be explained by this? Share your experience. Because talking about it is already a first step toward bringing it to consciousness. And more importantly, don't stop here. The next video will take you even deeper into another essential piece of this puzzle. If you really want to evolve, you cannot afford to ignore it. So keep watching, because this knowledge may be the missing key to transforming your life.